Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for being here. Just before we start, I just want to let you guys know we're going to do a live Q&A at the end for you if you have any questions for the last 5 minutes, rather than relying on the app, which isn't working. So don't do that thing of where I go, if you've got any questions, and you go, no. And then I go, okay, last question, and you all put your hands up. So get in there. You have a wonderful opportunity to ask these great people some questions. Welcome along to the Capture Masterclass, When Seeing is Deceiving, with writer and director Ben Chanan, executive producer Rosie Alison from Heyday Television. One of the stars of the show, Ben Miles, is with us, as well as executive producer Coan from NBCUniversal International Studios. It is an absolute pleasure to have you all here in Edinburgh. Thank you for making the trip to talk about this incredibly exciting new thriller, which I've had the pleasure of seeing the first episode of. It's so good. Before we begin, let's take a look at the trailer. So the series is set in London, which I believe has got something like 500,000 CCTV cameras. Here in Edinburgh, the council has 226, so maybe think about the next series here in Edinburgh. All joking aside, though, surveillance is a really kind of, it's an interesting subject. And this is such an intricate, woven, beautiful production. Ben, where did the seed and the idea for this, and when did it first come to you?
It's interesting you talk about CCTV cameras and the number of CCTV cameras in London, because, of course, we're very aware of that making this show. But I think we've all become very used to that, and to the point where we just don't think about it at all. And I remember once someone broke into my car, and the first thing I did was go, right, great, I'm sure someone's caught that on CCTV. And I looked around and investigated, and no one had, and I was disappointed that nobody had caught that on camera for me. So I think we've all learned to live with it, and we're not really scared of it anymore. And I guess part of the appeal of this is that maybe it might make us scared of CCTV again.
Or question it, at least.
Question it. I think with the advent of facial recognition, we're starting to go, oh, wait a minute. It's not just, potentially not just about keeping us safe. There could be other elements to this. But the idea for it kind of goes back some years when I was working in documentaries. I made a documentary where I followed people from Counterterrorism Command and other various sort of intelligence agencies, both in America and the UK. And I became aware of how integral video evidence was to our justice systems. And at the same time, quite separately, I was very aware of the development of visual effects and how much better and cheaper and quicker and more convincing they were becoming. And I kind of saw those two developments and thought, what if they were to collide? And surely they will one day. And wouldn't that be an interesting world for a drama? So that's where it started. It just took me years to turn that into a story. And
then when you started to form that story, and what kind of came first? Were there characters that helped you inform that story? Was the story easy to write? And did you always think of it being an episodic thing?
I didn't know who the characters were at first. I knew I had to have a guy who gets involved with video and video evidence and gets so Sean, as you can see from that, is the guy who is caught on camera doing something. And I knew I needed someone, but I didn't know who he was. And it took me ages. I tried to write a draft where he was a politician, another draft where he was a sports personality. I knew I needed him to be in the public eye, but then I thought it would be more interesting for him to be in the public eye and not want to be in the public eye. And so it was a very tricky character to develop. And when I finally got there, I got there. Did I think it was always going to be episodic? No, not necessarily. When I first thought of the idea, I thought, could this be a film? And I sort of talked to people, film people about it, and they said no. No, what they said was it sounds like it's got lots of hooks along the way, so maybe it's better to go and try and do this in TV. And in any case, no one's making films anymore, so why not? And I'm certainly glad I did try and get it through the TV route, because, well, we made it. And I think if we'd have tried to make it in movies, it would have taken so long, if it ever got made, that it could. There's a real timeliness to this, and thank God it's coming out right now.
Yeah.
But if it sort of took another 3 years to develop, as movies do, at least, it could be past its kind of interest date, you know.
I imagine in terms of keeping the kind of truth element to this world, for the production, you must have had done a deep dive into research into that world and making sure it was authentic and true.
Yeah, I mean, I guess part of the research just came from the years I'd spent making documentaries anyway, and kind of, you know, one of the sort of privileges of documentaries is that you get to go to places and meet people and hang out with them sometimes, who you would just never get to do in real life. And I interviewed the former head of the CIA in Washington, and people from Homeland Security, and people from the Met. And in one case, I sort of became quite friendly with one guy from the Met who ended up being our counterterrorism advisor on this. So he was very much the horse's mouth, and there was lots of things he could tell us and some things he couldn't tell us. And that was a whole kind of arm wrestle with him, but that was invaluable, yeah, for me and the cast as well, I think.
Rosie and Tom, if I can just chat to you guys about how it came to Heyday and NBC and what the development process was, and then at what point did it get taken to the BBC as well?
I think it goes back, I remember going back to 2015, right after I moved here. And Rosie and I would have regular creative conversations about areas that we're interested in, and one of them always was surveillance thriller. And the other was genetic memory, and we're still trying to find that one. Haven't quite cracked that one, and you look for existing scripts, you look for books, you look for articles, you look for people who are also interested, and then I think for maybe a year we were looking for something, and then the capture came into our lives.
And we leapt at it. I mean, at Heyday, we had been looking for a surveillance thriller for years, and it's a concept, you know, let's do a thriller about surveillance, which can remain very abstract. But what was amazing is Ben had already written this script where he had this fully fledged incident that then rippled outwards and outwards into this very meaningful conspiracy, which really speaks to our times and really does make you, you know, I think there's a phrase, documentary evidence, that certainly in my life, I think, oh, okay, well, there's documentary evidence for that, and you feel rock solid about it. And this is a series which just digs away at that and makes you entirely skeptical about that, which in some ways just, you know, feeds into the uncertainty we feel about everything today. The political discourse, everything is becoming much more elastic and uncertain. And Ben had come up with a crime incident which ripples outwards and somehow encompasses all of this.
There's a wonderful, you were telling me earlier that the 6 episodes, the time frame of that was it 4 days?
Yeah, 4 days.
That's brilliant. That kind of, you're there, you're in it, it's happening as you're watching kind of idea. Was that easy to write? Or
I find it easier to write that than if it was over 6 months.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but it just maybe it just suits the thriller to just be quick, and there's like there's an urgency, and there's a problem to it. And in fact, I mean, it was like the tighter the timeline, for some reason, it just appeals to me. I just find it, I guess I find it harder to imagine, well, what's the character done in the intervening 3 weeks? I've got to figure that out as well before I write this scene. I don't have to do that because I know what they just did because it just happened in the scene before. So maybe it's easier. I know that we talked about, well, they haven't slept. Like they've been up all night.
Worry about Rachel's sleeping hours.
Episode 1, they didn't sleep. Yeah. And then they go home for like a second, and then they all go back to work. And Ep 2, and Rosie was saying, but they never sleep. I mean, can they sleep sometimes? And so I phoned. We had another brilliant police advisor, kind of unofficial one, who's a sort of a friend of yours, I think, Rosie, and she was great. And I phoned her and said, do you ever just go for like 48 hours no sleep? And she said, yeah, all the time. You know, like we go home. Like sometimes she said, I drive home and I'm so tired I can't even get out of the car to go to my flat, so I sleep in the car and then just drive back to work. And she said that sometimes they sleep in the interview rooms.
Wow.
At the police station because they're on a case, you know. They've got to find evidence in the first 24 hours ideally, or if there's an extension, maybe 48. Yeah. But there's no going home to sleep when there's a case on like an urgent case like that. So yeah, it suited it to have that kind of timeline.
I think it gives the story a wonderful propulsive energy. There's this kinetic movement to it. It never stops and just keeps going. And I think as you experience, as you're watching it, you want to keep going to the next episode because it doesn't rest, and you don't want to rest with it.
Ben, when you first read the script, what was your reaction?
I was disappointed there are only 6 episodes. Really. I couldn't stop reading it. It's one of those fantastic moments where you get a script and you you sit and start reading, and the time just disappears. I couldn't stop turning the pages. It was a world and a subject matter which I think is, as we said, very interesting and very timely, and a subject about which it's very important to talk now and discuss. It's a wonderfully constructed thriller with many layers of truth and possible outcomes. It raises very important moral questions, and it just, as you said, Tom, it just rockets. It doesn't stop, and there's no dead wood. There's nothing that hinders you from really wanting to know what happens at the end and who is actually telling the truth and what is actually happening. It's a fabulously constructed conspiracy, modern, contemporary, relevant conspiracy thriller, which I think people will love watching.
Deeply rooted in these characters, of whom Ben is a tremendous example.
We're going to talk in a bit more detail about your character once we meet him. So this is Commander
Danny Hart, yeah.
Here he is. Seems like an all right chap. What can you tell us about him?
He is the head of a unit called Counterterrorism Command, which is an amalgam of Special Branch and the old Anti-Terrorism Command. I think I've got that right. Which
yes,
were
you have.
Good, thank you. They were amalgamated in the early 2000s into this one unit which operates with the Metropolitan Police, dealing with counterterrorism locally, nationally and internationally. They also work in close tandem with MI5 and MI6 and are sort of world-renowned for being the best at what they do, due to the difficult past we've had with the IRA and the troubles in Northern Ireland. That's really the reason why the British counterterrorism forces are considered the best in the world. I chatted with one of our advisors, Chris, who was an officer at Counterterrorism Command for I think over a decade, and I was amazed by the sort of international nature of them. They're called out to any incident, any sort of terrorist-related incident around the world to investigate, to assess, to share their intelligence with the other intelligence communities in the countries that they're sent to. It's a really huge operation. They seem to have bottomless resources from the government, so their tech, the whole way they operate is the most up-to-date, the most well-funded unit in the country as far as policing is concerned. And my character is basically the boss of that. He is under huge pressure to gain as many convictions as possible, to stop as many terror threats as possible, of which there are, having spoken to Chris, again, a staggering, terrifying amount of potential incidents, never mind actual incidents which we get to hear about. It's a very high pressure, high profile, high stress, I think highly rewarding job as well when it goes right. But it's as you said, Ben, I don't think they sleep very much in that department. It's also a very interesting double life. This guy Chris was saying his family, even though he's retired from counterterrorism for a number of years, they still don't know what he did. He couldn't tell them exactly what his job was. He has 3 phones. He can't appear on any social media still. When I met him in this cafe in London, and whenever someone came in the room, he instinctively looked up and sort of clocked them and sort of made some kind of assessment about each person that walked in, and he positioned himself so that he could see people coming in the door. Wow. That was fascinating, that level of alert that he's still on is kind of still with him. So that's my character kind of in a nutshell.
With a character like that, you can't just kind of get the script and start shooting. You need to immerse yourself in the world of that type of person, and to really get to the core of why they do what they do. And
sure. I think you need to find a sort of a real deep reason why your character does what they do in terms of motivation. And I think this character has a very strong sense of doing what is right, a strong sense of finding justice, he feels deeply involved in this battle against terrorism, both locally, nationally, and globally. But the interesting question is what is his moral map? What is the right thing for him to do, and what is not the right thing for him to do, and how flexible is that morality? This is one of the big questions of the show, I think, is where do you draw the line in terms of what is right and what isn't right, and what is acceptable in the world of incrimination, what is acceptable as evidence in court, how far do you go in order to trap the bad guys, basically?
There's this wonderful, I got a sense even from the first episode that there's this wonderful almost connective tissue between the characters as well. They're all kind of weaved and connected in ways that we will find out as the series progresses. Is that fair?
I hope so. I hope that's true.
There's also great personal, aside from the narrative line of the thriller and the conspiracy, there's incredible intimacy between the characters. People are very closely linked personally and emotionally as well, which is, I think, also one of the bedrocks of this great show, is that you care about the people and you care about who they care about in the show. And often with emotional ties comes conflict of interest and, again, grey areas in terms of morality. One person may not agree particularly with the other person's point of view as to what is doing the right thing.
And we saw it within that clip, Holiday Granger, who plays the Rachel Carey, this kind of you get from the first episode, incredibly driven young woman within that industry. What can you tell us about her and also writing that character?
Yeah, so Carey is kind of our eyes, really. She's coming to this story fresh like we are. She doesn't know what to make of Sean Emery, the soldier. She doesn't know who to believe. She's a young, kind of hotshot professional on the police fast-track scheme. She's got designs. She kind of wants Danny Hart's job.
Yeah.
And there's no reason why she couldn't climb there or even higher. And she's kind of what the police are looking for now in terms of the sort of fast track. You don't spend years on the street. You get fast track to be a detective, and they hunt out the sort of big brains. And she's all that. She's also loyal, and she's believes in the system. She believes that the organisations she works with will always do the right thing, and she goes on a journey with that.
We've got a second clip. I don't know if this feels like a good time to show it.
Sure. Yeah. Shall I just give you a little, just the technical context? So she's monitoring the whereabouts of Sean Emery, the soldier, who is a person of interest to her and her team at the moment. And her team, against her instructions, decided to follow him on foot. She thought that wasn't a good idea. She's got it all under control. She can monitor him from the CCTV station. So there's a sort of battle between old school policing and new school monitoring, and they don't quite see eye to eye, and that kind of culminates in this clip from episode 2.
Yeah. There she is. So good, isn't it? She's phenomenal.
She's great.
She's so great.
Visual storytelling, man. She does so much of that. So much of the story, twists and turns, dependent on Carey's reaction to things, and Holiday's just amazing at that.
And we see this mothership kind of control room, and in terms of the logistics of filming it as well, because she's watching those scenes that have already been shot with, so the kind of logistics around that as well must have been pretty complicated for a production, and 6 episodes of that along the way.
It was a real scheduling puzzle because everything had to be pre-shot, created as inserts, and Ben worked with this fantastic CCTV director who specialises in creating CCTV footage. He's a sort of video installation artist, and he went round and shot hours and hours of extraordinary CCTV to be put into these different scenes. And so then when actors were watching, they were watching real footage. But the sort of the puzzle of trying to figure that all out, so that when Holiday looks at a phone and the clip is there, it was quite a quite a scenario to fix. Yeah.
You can see that there's still a little
Couple
bit
of-
grey screen
couple
in
of-
that.
couple of
in
grey
that.
screens
It's not,
there,
not
yeah.
quite finished yet because we're still making. You must have looked at some scenes we had all done for you, didn't we? Like with the footage was there on the screen. And
Oh, it was
occasionally,
fantastic.
Even with all
So-
the months of prep,
Yeah.
even occasionally we were like, sorry, it's grey screen.
Only very occasionally, but it was so great. It's so helpful to play a scene if you're watching, a scene on a phone. You've got video footage on a phone, and often you're expected to just look at a kind of grey phone or grey screen and react to something. But 99% of the time in this, the actual footage of what your characters meant to be seeing was there and had been shot and edited and uploaded to the phone, and it just made playing it such a rich experience. It was kind of easier to react, and it's such a great theme in this show is seeing people watch stuff.
Yeah.
Watching people watch a screen. It's and it's done so brilliant. And you're right, Holly does it. Everybody. It's such fun watching someone watching something. I don't know why.
And you see it at different layers.
Yes.
You see them watching, you see the local CCTV monitoring team watching, you see, I think we don't go to the police station as much when you're at SO15, so you're seeing the levels of people watching other people and who has more access and who has more technological capability. And
You directed every episode.
Yeah.
As well as writing.
Yeah.
Thanks.
But I guess there was a question at some point whether you'd have a second director.
Right.
to take the
Yes,
pressure
we
off.
did. We did initially think there'd be a second director, and whether it was part of my control freakery or somewhere between my control freakery and pragmatism meant that we decided actually it'd be better to have to make it a single director show. But the crunch kind of came to exactly that process, where we realized that we're going to be shooting inserts to go into scenes that are going to be shot in the second block, and we can't possibly put them together because the sets won't be ready, and the footage won't have been shot to play in. And wouldn't it be better if the person who directs that footage ends up directing the bit where it's, otherwise you're sharing a scene with another director, and that's very impractical. So that's where we just thought, you know what, it's just this whole endeavor is much more straightforward when there's one director.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a pragmatism, but there's also the confidence that we had in Ben as our storyteller to deliver it all.
Yeah.
I mean, who better to do it? He wrote all 6 scripts. He should direct all 6 scripts. I mean, it's that authorship is there.
And nobody else comes close to understanding the puzzle quite like, the question of, why is 2 o'clock mentioned? And then Ben will say, well, because in another scene over there, the whole timetable, he had minute by minute everything mapped out all the time.
And combined with that, with Ben's great authority, as you say, and authorship of it, for the cast, it was great to see Ben allow us come to it as, in terms of the timescale of the whole production, relative strangers, relative newcomers to the whole thing, and to allow us to bring what we could bring to it and let us sort of play and investigate and explore and contribute to the characters that Ben had created. And you were very generous in that respect. They were very much your characters who you'd lived with for years, but actually once the actors had been cast, we all felt like they were our characters, and we could bring to the table something that we came up with. It was a great collaboration, often with things that has ownership of one person, they can sometimes feel uncollaborative, but this was the total opposite.
It was all the way through from the development process. I mean, Ben knew it so well that there was a confidence in the story that allowed for other input to be considered.
Well, I felt like I had such a great cast as well, and that's part of the joy of casting, is you see your characters taken and they become something slightly different, and so they should do once an actor puts their stamp on it.
And we've probably got time for a couple of quick questions if anybody has some. If not, I can keep talking. Hello, just got a microphone behind you there. Thank you.
Hiya, Ben, just a question for you. You obviously did tons of research for this, like in terms of meeting the CIA ex-heads and stuff like that. How much came before in the development process before you approached kind of like broadcasters, and how much came afterwards when you were actually developing more of the story arc?
Most of it came before. The vast majority of it came before, and it became slowly, because I sort of developed this idea. It was in the back of my mind as I was directing stuff for a few years. Whenever I had a bit of time off, I would go back to the development of this. So that happened before I wrote the first script. So I wrote the first script on spec, then teamed up with Rosie and Heyday and Tom and NBC Universal, and then to the BBC. By which point the story, we had the bulk of the story kind of down, and then it was about detail. The rest of the research was just about detail. It was about calling up our many advisors and going, what do they say when this happens, or whatever.
Anyone else in the room? I wanted to ask about whether I feel that this is something that there's a conversation to be had once the show's aired, in terms of once everyone sees the 6 episodes. I think someone kind of made a joke in the room upstairs about you being on Newsnight after this thing airs, sort of thing. But that's one side of this wonderful series that you've made, that it is addressing a real issue and something that's affecting us all, really.
So we'll come back in 6 weeks and.
But do you see that yourself, and that this is something that will stimulate a conversation?
Well, yeah, I think we hope so. It's interesting. I mean, I think we talk about the themes and all that. It's obviously a very character-led story as well, and hopefully that's why you're tuning in every week to see, is Sean going to be reunited with his family and so on, and is Carey going to solve the case, and what does it mean to them on a personal level? But yeah, along the way there is a discussion. I mean, the thing, right, that's motoring all this, I've never saw that as a MacGuffin, as they often are in thrillers. The thing is interesting in itself, I'd like to think.
And a big question about the greater good and what is for the greater good, and it's a big moral series, really.
And it's going to air on September the 3rd, and weekly.
Weekly.
On BBC One.
It has to be weekly because we haven't finished the rest of it yet.
Tom, Ben, Rosie, and Ben, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you
Thank you guys for your questions. Thank you, guys.